Hey there, I'm Kat, and this is Brews and Reviews. In today's video, I'm going to be giving you guys a recap of Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. With the impending release of Onyx Storm, you might just not remember what happened in Fourth Wing, so let's just go over it right now. So in Fourth Wing, we follow Violet Sorrengail, who is a 20-year-old woman who is being forced to join the Riders Quadrant of Basgiath War College. Now, all her life, Violet trained to be a scribe, and she was intending to go into the archives to categorize information, and her mother, General Lilith Sorrengail, decided no, you're going to become a rider like your brother and sister and me, and we're all going to be riders together. No scribes for you. Even Violet's sister Mira cannot dissuade her mother, so Mira gives Violet this dragon scale armor that should protect her, and some new boots and some new kit. Because Violet has some sort of hypermobility disorder which affects how her joints work and her cartilage work, and a lot of other things with her body, like her joints dislocate quite a lot, and she can get hurt more easily doing seemingly normal things. So the Riders Quadrant is probably not the best place for her, given that it's ruthless and people will be killing each other all over the place, she'll be fighting a lot of the time. It's not really a safe space for someone with hypermobility disorder, but she must go. So she has one last parting conversation with Mira, who tells Violet not to go near anyone that has a rebellion mark. So the people who carry these rebellion relics are the children of the former leaders of the rebellion, who have all been executed because the rebellion didn't pan out the way they wanted to. But in particular, Mira says stay away from Xaden Ryerson, who is the son of Fen Ryerson, who killed their brother Brennan. Then Fen was executed by their mother, so Xaden Ryerson in particular is going to be out to kill Violet. So it's a bad time for Violet, and she really needs to stay away from him. Mira advises her to go and find her childhood friend, Dane Atos, who joined the Riders Quadrant the year before. So now Violet's on her own, and she's about to take on the parapet, which is a very tall, thin walkway that serves as the entrance to the Riders Quadrant. It's also windy, raining, the conditions are really terrible, and they've got to make it across this really slippery, dangerous path. She starts talking to the people who are next to her, one of whom immediately dies as he gets on the parapet. The other person she ends up talking to is Rhiannon, who she ends up switching her left boot with Rhiannon's left boot so that they both have kind of less slippy footwear. Because Violet's kind of a nice person and she doesn't want her new friend to die. Anyway, they start crossing the parapet. Rhiannon goes first. She seems to make it fine. Violet starts going and she is freaking out. So she starts info dumping history and geography facts about the world, which is really useful for the reader. So if you want some more information on how the world is set up, then just skip back to this chapter. Behind her is a guy called Jack, who immediately shoves some other guy off of the parapet because he's just a murderer and a dickhead. Then he decides to turn his eyes towards Violet because she looks a bit weak, so he might just push her off. So she kind of runs across, makes it across the parapet, and he's like, I'm still gonna kill you. So she gets her dagger and it's right close to his balls, and he rethinks it a little bit, but it does start a long-running feud. Violet then manages to find Dane Atos, and he is freaking out because he has known her all her life, and he's like, why are you here? This is so dangerous. You are gonna die. Somebody's gonna kill you. Oh my god, what do we do? You should leave. And she said, try talking to my mother about it. Doesn't work. I'm here for good. So he accepts it, and he's like, okay, well, I'm gonna try and keep you alive because that's all I can do. So he ends up putting her in his wing, which is Fourth Wing. Only the problem is Xaden Ryerson ends up in charge of their wing too. So he becomes their wing leader, and Violet's shitting herself because he can literally do anything he wants. Also, he's stunning, and she keeps thinking about how hot he is all the time. Then some dragons show up, and some people run screaming because they weren't expecting to see dragons. I don't know, why are you in the Riders Quadrant if you're gonna run screaming for the first dragon you see? You deserve to die. So anyway, about 20% of people died crossing the parapet and like being burned alive by dragons, so they've lost a considerable number of applicants. So the first sort of class that we have is battle briefing. The students go over like recent news and talk about different strategies of how they would face certain situations. And the first thing we sort of learn about is a battle that's recently taken place where the wards around the country failed, allowing a drift of griffins from Poromail into Nevern. So obviously there's a battle, dragons fight griffins, they're on different sides, you get the picture. So Violet's scribe training actually really helps her in battle briefing because she knows the sort of questions to ask. She has a history of reading this sort of report, so she is quite clued in and comes off really well in that class. Sparring is not really for Violet though. In that class they basically do hand-to-hand combat, and immediately the guy from the parapet that tried to push her off, Jack, he just kills a guy right in front of everyone. He's like, didn't know that guy's neck was so weak. Oopsie daisy. Except not oopsie daisy because he's just an ass. Violet ends up fighting a pink-haired woman called Imogen, who is one of the the Marked, and she ends up getting her arm broken. Dane tries once again to get Violet to leave the Rider Squadron because he thinks she's gonna die, and she's like, I'm not doing it, mate. I'm not leaving. So she gets taken to a healer and it's all fine. By the time she gets back to her room, she finds a book that has been left underneath her pillow, which is a present from her sister, which was originally a present from her brother, which is like a survival guide for the Rider Squadron. And she ends up finding out that the sparring battles are picked like a week in advance, so she has about a week to prepare if she can find who she's meant to be paired up with. And that's great for Violet because she also knows how to poison people, and she's on kitchen duty, so she starts poisoning people that she ends up sparring against, and she's like, I'm winning all my fights, how great. Now Violet goes out hunting to try and find some poisoning ingredient. Now while she's up this tree trying to get this ingredient, she ends up witnessing a meeting of the Marked Ones. Now there's quite a few Marked Ones altogether, including Zayden Ryerson, and it's actually illegal for more than 3 Marked Ones to meet, presumably because the government doesn't want any rebellion-related people having a meeting at any point in time. So she ends up witnessing this, and they're basically just trying to help the new people survive and try and give them tips and tricks and see what they can work on them with. So Violet's like, oh, okay, well they're not really doing anything bad, so I won't say anything about it, which is great because Zayden immediately catches her after everyone else leaves. He's like, listen, I wield shadows. You were hiding in the shadows. Did you think I wasn't going to see you? But since they weren't actually doing anything wrong in her opinion, she's just like, I'm not going to tell anyone. Why would I tell anyone? And he's like, well, I don't really trust you, but I owe you a favor, so just like, you know? Now Violet's next opponent is too ill to fight, so she ends up fighting Zayden, and everyone's thinking, oh, he's gonna kill her now, but he doesn't end up doing that. He ends up actually giving her some really useful advice, like stop poisoning people. It's a great strategy for in here, but you can't poison your real opponents, so, you know, stop. Learn some real skills. They have a bit of a sparring fight thing, and she ends up getting really horny for him. He's hot. What can you do? She definitely loses that fight though. After that, Violet ends up alone with Dane, who once again tries to convince her to leave the Rider Squadron and sneak into the Scribe Squadron. And she's like, listen, why don't you have any faith in me? You're the worst friend ever. So she decides not to leave, and the challenges move on. The next challenge that Violet faces is the Gauntlet. It's like a big assault course that's very dangerous, and if you fall off, you'll probably die. Because they don't have health and safety in the Rider Squadron. Actually, I think they want most of the people to die, to be honest. So yeah, the Gauntlet is really deadly, and Violet is too small. She is quite a short woman, and she can't make it up the end of this Gauntlet. Other people struggle, and she watches one of her wing, who was really confident in going on the Gauntlet, just fall off and die right in front of her. Nice little reminder that this is a completely deadly place, and pretty much everyone is in danger at any point in time. Violet's kind of pissed because she doesn't know how to beat this Gauntlet. She ends up talking to Zayden about it, and he's like, you're thinking about it the wrong way. You need to use that brain of yours to come up with a way to conquer the Gauntlet. Now the reason it's so important that the Gauntlet is mastered is because it's the only path to get towards presentation, which is the next stage of becoming a Dragon Rider. So on the day of the presentation, you either finish the Gauntlet or you die, and that's that. And Violet does manage to get through the Gauntlet by using her daggers that she brought from home, so it's quite unconventional, but she manages to do it. So Fourth Wing end up going on this presentation, which is basically all of the dragons that are willing to bond with riders this year gather around, then the Dragon Rider applicants just trail on through so the dragons can judge them and eliminate them if they so choose. One guy gets burned because he's indecisive, another woman gets burned because she's just a bitch. 2 green dragons approach Violet and they start sniffing her, and she's like, oh god, they're gonna kill me. But it turns out they just recognize the scent of her sister's dragon scales that are on her body armor, and they let her go. The other notable thing about presentation is that they happen to see a gold dragon, which is really small and is a feather tail, because dragons have different kinds of tails, making them deadly in different ways, and a feather tail obviously has like nothing deadly on the end of its tail. So by the time Threshing comes around, there are only actually 6 people left in Fourth Wing because everybody keeps dying and it's just a bad time. But Violet's still there, Rhiannon's still there, and a couple of other people that we're starting to get to know. Now Threshing is basically where all of the applicants get sent out into the field and try and find their dragon. They're supposed to just like walk in random directions that feel right and try and find their dragon. Now Violet's just been wandering around for a while and it's not going well, and then she sees like this glint of this gold dragon, and she sees Jack and a couple of his like pals going up to try and kill the gold dragon because they're like, it's small, it's weak, we hate it. And Violet's like, okay, well we can't let him kill the dragon. So she ends up standing up and she's like, stop that. So she ends up having a fight with these 3 guys and injures Jack, who runs away, and then the other guys are gonna try and kill her, but Zayden is there. Zayden is not allowed to interfere, but he's watching, and so is his dragon Sigale. Both of them are not very happy about this situation because this little dragon is just sitting there all helpless looking, and then there's Violet standing in front of her trying to protect this dragon from these guys. Violet gets a bit injured and it's looking really bad for her until a giant black dragon, the most powerful, biggest dragon of the lot, that wasn't even supposed to be bonding during Threshing, appears behind her and he's like, listen, out these guys. And they do. And it turns out the black dragon 10 has decided to bond with Violet, much to her surprise. They go for a bit of a fly, Violet falls off, but 10 manages to catch her, which is pretty nice considering some of the other dragons are just letting anyone that falls off just die. They don't really care about the riders' lives either. So Violet lands and she's like, 10 has bonded me. And it turns out that Andana, the golden dragon, has also chosen to bond her. So Violet ends up bonded to 2 dragons, one of whom is insanely powerful and large, and one who is like a teeny tiny golden baby. Now there was a debate on whether she could stay bonded to both of the dragons, and people just had to let that go. Dane comes over and is like, you should try to not be bonded with 10 because you're gonna be in danger and I want what's best for you. And she's just not really having a great time with that. And Xaden comes over and he's like, you need to be careful because now you are target number 1 for everybody that didn't bond a dragon because they're gonna try and kill you and convince 10 to try and bond them instead. Now why does Xaden care, might you ask? Well, his dragon Sigale and 10 are mates, and the mate bond is incredibly strong, so Xaden is stuck with Violet. Not only are they stuck together, if Violet dies, 10 is very likely to die because his bond between him and his last rider was so strong and he thought he wasn't going to bond again. So now his next bond with his rider Violet basically means that if she dies, so will he. And if he dies, then Sigale might die, and then if Sigale dies, Xaden will die. So there's a whole knock-on effect of, oh, you're stuck together now, for life. So at this point, everyone who bonded with the dragon is given a dragon sigil, which is where they will eventually channel magic from. Dane ends up kissing Violet, and Violet, who thought that she might kind of like Dane, just feels like she's just kissed her cousin. The ick is immediate, she is not happy with it, and she's like, oh, okay, none of that please. But then Dane changes his mind and he's like, actually I want to progress in my military career, so let's not shag or anything, I don't want to. And she's like, thank God, thank God. Xaden sets Violet up with Imogen, who was the girl who broke her arm in the first sparring match, to try and work on her strength because she needs to be able to stay in her seat on 10 and she also just needs to be stronger generally. So they start training together. Now because Violet is a rider, she gets taken off of kitchen duty and she gets put onto archive duty, so she ends up visiting the scribes for a bit and she's like, oh hey, while I'm in here, can I have this book that I just really wanted to read? It's like a book of fairy tales that my dad gave me. And her friend goes off, sees if she can find the book and says it doesn't exist. And it's weird because every book that ever existed should be in these archives, but it's not. There's some more dragon riding practice and Dane finds out that Violet can't keep her seat and he is mad. He's big mad. You're gonna die and this is terrible news, and she has had enough of this man and his rules oriented pessimism. She's just like, could you just not leave me alone please? Anyway, that night she's having a dream about her dad telling her fairy tales and she wakes up to 6 people trying to murder her. The unbonded have found their way into her bedroom at night, the one place where she's supposed to be safe, and are trying to kill her. So in this scuffle, Andana manages to channel some power to Violet, which helps her to freeze time, and it lets her get herself out of the situation, run to the door. When she opens it, Xaden is there. Time unfreezes, and Xaden murders everyone, because why wouldn't he? After all the murder, Xaden checks on Violet, and she's just really horny for him because he just killed some guys for her. And then they sneak out to see the dragons and they have this conversation where basically they find out that Andana is actually a juvenile dragon, and what she did instead of channeling her actual siphon is that she gave Violet some of her own power, so she couldn't do it for very long and it likely won't be a power that stays for very long. They decide to keep that siphon a secret because the dragons don't really want anyone knowing about juvenile dragons, and they're already curious enough about Andana that they're just like, let's just not say anything because we don't actually trust these people and it's dragon business, it's not human business. Also, if they overuse that power, then everyone will die. Now Xaden assigns a first year called Liam to be Violet's bodyguard because he can be around her at all times. She kind of hates that she's got a bodyguard, but Liam's a really nice guy and she ends up being friends with him. Now Violet also saw who let those unbonded people into her room and she told Xaden. Xaden brings it up and is like, hey, this person Amber, who was also Dane's ex-girlfriend from the previous year, tried to kill Violet. And then Dane's like, no way! I don't believe that! Why would she do that? That's ridiculous! So then he tries to use his sigil, which is mind reading, and he can mind read and see people's memories if he touches their face. And she's like, back the fuck off, do not touch me without my permission, and then just shows the memory to 10, who shares the memory with the dragons, who shares the memory with the Dragon Riders, and then they immediately condemn Amber because it's obvious she was right there, they all saw it, and burn her alive. Don't break the rules. In the archives, Violet reads some information that isn't classified, and she's like, oh, there was an attack recently, that's really weird, and then they don't talk about it in battle briefing. So it's obvious that a lot of information is sort of not being disseminated into the Riders Quadrant, which is starting to get really suspicious. Ten starts to channel his power into Violet, and Violet has no idea how to tap into this, so she has now got a ticking time bomb, where if she doesn't figure out how to use her sigil, then essentially she'll just combust. It will be a very bad time. She's gonna die. She also realizes this about the same time that Ten and Sigil are getting busy with it, and Zayden's like, listen, you're gonna need some better willpower, and you need to shut the dragons out, because if they're horny, you're gonna be horny, and then we're all gonna be horny, and that's a bad mixture of things. So they kiss, and then he's like, hang on a second, like, no, we don't actually want to do this, right? Like, you don't want to do this. So they don't end up doing anything apart from kiss. Rhiannon reveals that her signet is summoning, and then in sparring, Violet ends up in the match that she never wanted to be in, which is sparring against Jack. And Jack is trying to kill her at every point. He is also kind of succeeding. He's using his power on her, and then she poisons him with oranges, so she does manage to stay alive throughout the fight, but she's not doing well. So Xaden is a bit pissed because she knew she was going to fight Jack and didn't tell him, and he turned up late and he was like, listen, I could have died right then and you didn't tell me. So he decides he's going to take over all of her training, and he is going to help her learn how to stay alive. So the final squad battle rolls around, and the final challenge is to steal something from Basgiath that is going to be most relevant and beneficial to an enemy. Violet's like, I know what we should steal. We should break into my mum's office and steal something from there. It's dead dangerous, but we should do it anyway. They actually managed to pull it off, and they steal an up-to-date map of all of the locations around Navarre and where all of the forces are, including updates from the previous night. They manage to win the squad battle, and it gets them sent to a place called Montserrat, which is like a fort that's sort of out of the way, quite a safe place, but just somewhere they can get some like first-hand experience of just being outside of the college. As soon as they get there, Violet happens to notice her sister is in the place, and they've not been able to talk to each other because first years in the Riders Quadrant aren't allowed to communicate with their families, and they're like, oh my god, you're alive, this is great, and they have a nice little reunion time. Violet and Rhiannon sneak out because Montserrat is really close to where Rhiannon's family are at, and she really wants to see her newborn nephew, and Mira comes with them, and they're like, wow, this is what cute families look like, what's that? We've not had that ever, and they get sad about it. Then Xaden turns up because Sigil and Ten can't be away from each other for more than 3 days. Now the plan in Montserrat is to sort of plan a mission as if they were actually doing it, and Xaden and Dane kind of have a dick measuring contest about who should be in charge and what they should be doing, and Xaden reveals that he can communicate to Violet through her thought, and this is because of the mated pair sort of situation, because usually a dragon and a rider can only communicate with each other in their thoughts, but Xaden can't hear Andana's thought because she's not part of the mated pair. After all of the infighting, Mira yells at everyone and says, stop behaving like children on the playground, you're idiots, which actually seems to knock some sense into the boys, but they don't really get a chance to enact what they were planning to do as griffins attack, and Mira has to go off and fight the griffins, and Violet's like, I can help, Tan's here, we can help. Xaden kisses her and he's like, leave for me, please, and he manages to convince her to leave, which is horrible because she knows that she's not going to be able to find out if Mira lived or died in that situation. So they end up going back to Basgiath. Violet's a bit pissed with Xaden, but she does end up figuring out how to communicate via her mind the way that Xaden has been, and then war games start, and Xaden has a little surprise for Violet in the form of a saddle that he's had made for Tan, and basically this means that she can strap in and not have to worry about losing her seat, because up until now Tan has been the only thing keeping her in her seat with his magic. Every time that he lets loose of that control, she sort of flies out and he has to catch her. So this will really help her stay in her seat, and it's kind of an unheard of thing. Dragons don't wear saddles for riders, but Tan is more forgiving than most, and he decides what he will allow for the sake of his rider. Now in the war games, it's kind of a version of capture the flag, except they're also trying to capture a dragon egg, and then they start flying around, and Violet's team is against Jack's team, and Jack is still a murderous asshole and stabs Liam in the side, and Liam falls off his dragon. It's looking like he's gonna die, and Violet channels Andana's power again to stop time for her and Ten and catch Liam. So she manages to save Liam, and then things get really bad for her because she's like, fucking Jack, this guy. So she actually manages to tap into her signet from Ten, which is being able to wield lightning, and she strikes lightning onto where Jack is standing, killing him. They manage to win the war games. Liam is okay. He managed to get to a healer in time and she saved him, which is all good news, except Violet's really depressed because she just channeled her power and immediately killed a guy, which is not really what she thought she was going to be doing with her life. Xaden is really good at comforting her, and he's like, actually, do you know what? I'm really glad that he's dead because you saved Liam doing that, and that's, you know, Liam's really precious to me. We grew up together. We're basically brothers. Thank you for doing that. And also, yeah, it sucks to kill people. They end up together in her room that night, and they decide to give in and just have sex and also destroy her room because Violet doesn't have control of her lightning powers, and she ends up setting fire to the curtain, and they destroy the dresser. It's just a whole bad time for Violet's room. However, it's really not a bad time for Violet and Xaden because they're both really enjoying themselves. They have a nice little tender moment afterwards where Violet asks Xaden about the scars on his back, and he said, oh, there are 107 there because I took personal responsibility for the children of every rebellion leader that would have been executed had I not made this bargain. And essentially he stopped 107 kids from being killed, but he also is responsible for the fact that they have to become riders. They have no choice in being conscripted to the rider squadron when they come of age. So he feels like really conflicted about the whole thing, but technically it's the reason they're alive. Violet starts having private lessons with Professor Carr, who is essentially the magic teacher, because he's like, you set fire to a bunch of things last night in your sleep. You have no control, even though that's not what she was doing when she set fire to things. But the lessons do reveal that she has quite a lot of power and she's getting better at wielding, but not necessarily aiming her lightning. Violet finds a letter hidden in the back of Fables that she managed to get from Mira when they were at Montserrat. It's from her dad, which basically says, oh, just be careful about what you read in the history books because all it takes is one generation to completely rewrite history and then you'd never know. You'd never know. Violet's like, well, that's really suspicious. Meanwhile, Violet and Xaden decide that they should just angry flirt at each other but not actually have sex because he's like, don't fall for me. Don't fall for me. And she's like, well, I'm gonna because I have feelings for you, obviously, and you have feelings for me. What's wrong with you? But they end up not having sex for a bit. On Reunification Day, which is the day that marked the end of the rebellion, the king comes to Basgiath and there's supposed to be like this big celebration, but pretty much most of Violet's friends who are marked ones are absent because why would they celebrate the date that their parents all got murdered? Liam has to go to the party with Violet because he's her bodyguard and he's like, listen, I take this seriously. Xaden didn't make me come here. I am here because I want to protect you. And they end up talking to the king, General Melgren, and General Sorengale. General Sorengel's still a bitch towards her daughter. She's just really unfriendly, unpleasant. And so is General Melgren. I should mention General Melgren's signet is the ability to foresee an outcome of a situation. He's a really useful person to have as a general, but really not a great person to be antagonistic towards. Now Violet goes looking for Xaden because she's like, oh, this must be a really bad day for him. Even though this is the anniversary of my brother's death, it's also the anniversary of his father's death, and like where all bad things happen for him. She finds him out on the parapet, so she makes her way out to him and he's like, what the fuck are you doing out here? He's like, well, what are you doing out here? He's like, well, I've got shadows that can save me if I fall. Is the lightning gonna save you if you fall? And then they have like a little bit of a fighty fight thing, and they end up coming back off of the parapet. But Xaden's like really depressed and doesn't want anything to do with anything, and she's like, okay, come on, I will take care of you. And they go back and they have some sexy time. They have a lot of sexy times. More furniture gets destroyed, including a window. On their fifth go around, they get interrupted by someone knocking saying there's been an attack, and they're like, oh crap. So everybody rushes to get sorted, and then it turns out it's more war games, and everyone is getting sent off to different places to engage in these war games, and that was just a test to see how quickly people gather. Now Violet and Liam were supposed to be going with Dane, but Xaden switches them out to be as part of his team, and they're going towards Athbean, which is a place that Xaden snuck off to earlier in the book, but didn't really tell Violet why. Dane's really not very happy about this and tries to convince Violet otherwise, and then she's like, no, I'll go with Xaden, I can help Xaden. And Dane gets unreasonably pissed about it and is like, fine, whatever, I'll miss you. And Violet doesn't really think anything unusual about it because that's just how Dane has been acting since he's become a rider. They fly off and they take a little rest before they get to Athbean. And Violet's feeling a bit sore because generally her body hurts. And some Griffin riders appear and are like, oh hi, what are you just doing sitting around? And they seem to know Xaden and they seem to know everybody else that's in this little wing. And Violet's like, excuse me, you know these people? Basically it turns out that Xaden and the Marked Ones have been working with the Griffin Flyers to provide them with weapons, and everybody knew about it, including Violet's dragons, and they all kept it from her. So she's feeling very betrayed and having a very bad time as she realizes that she's in a group of people who all possibly want to kill her. But this is kind of overshadowed as the Griffin Flyers reveal that some Venin are attacking a nearby town. Now Venin have been mentioned in the book, but they have been mentioned only in Violet's fairy tale. They're people who channel magic directly from like nature. They kind of steal it and like get perverted by it. Whereas they channel magic through their dragons and griffin flyers channel through their griffin. The venin are just kind of evil. At this point, Violet also finds out that the people who are running Navarre already know about this. They have just been lying to everybody, and she clocks on that her dad's letter may have something to do with this, and maybe her dad knew more than he was saying. The group get to the fortress at Athbeen and find it completely empty, with a note for them saying, oh well, if you go to this next fortress you'll find your actual orders, but just so you know, there's like a big battle that's going to happen here with some venin attacking this town, and all those people are going to die if you do. So they realize that they've basically been sent there to die, because they can't really leave a town of innocent people to die. And at this point, Violet finally cottons on to the fact that Dane has been reading her memories. Every time he came to talk to her and he put a hand on her face, it wasn't because he just liked to touch her, it was because he was stealing her memories without her permission, and she's fierce. But yeah, they've basically been sentenced to die, and they decide that they're not going to let the townspeople die, so they have these special daggers that they've been providing the griffin flyers that are made in Navarre, and they decide to fight these venin. There are 4 venin in the town, and it turns out they can conjure wyverns, which are basically 2-legged dragons, but they're like unnatural, and Ten calls them abominations. Also interesting to note at this point is that General Melgren cannot see what the marked ones are doing because of the rebellion relics on them, so he has no idea what is happening at this point in time. So they get into this battle, and even though they outnumber the venin, they are not anywhere near as strong as the venin. Liam manages to save Violet, but his dragon Day ends up getting sort of caught in a death spiral with one, and then dies. And then Liam dies. And it's very sad. But just before he dies, he says, take care of my sister when she comes next year. So Violet's like, I will. It's depressing. At this point, Violet is so angry, she decides to embrace her nickname that Xaden has given her, which is Violence, and she lets loose with her lightning. One of the venin manages to get on Ten's back, so Violet unstraps herself, and everybody is not happy about that, because they're like, you're gonna fall off and die. And she's like, well, if I don't kill this thing, then it's gonna kill Ten. Violet manages to kill the venin, but she does get stabbed in the exchange, so she's not doing well. What they do find out is when a venin dies, all the wyvern that they created also die. So now they realize that they need to kill the venin, and all the wyvern will disappear too. Violet manages to kill another venin, and then she falls off of Ten, and she's very close to burnout. She's used a lot of her power, because it turns out that the blade that she was stabbed with was poisoned. So Xaden kills the last venin, and they end up taking her to their kind of secret base in Arisha, which is the former capital, the place that got destroyed when the rebellion was finished, and they take her there to see this secret mender, which is essentially a healer that they've got hidden there. Violet's unconscious for a while, but she does seem to recover, and at first when she wakes up she doesn't really remember anything, and Xaden's like, cool, okay, I can make it up to you, and then she's like, oh, I feel very betrayed by you. I'm not going to like betray your trust or anything, like, because I can see like we need to be on the side of defeating the venin in whatever this war is that's really happening, but like I don't ever trust you, like I'm not gonna trust you, get away from me please. And Xaden's feeling pretty bad about that, but he's like, please, I will make it up to you, I will do anything. He tells her that her dragons are safe because she can't quite hear them at the moment, and Xaden reveals that Andana has changed, but he doesn't say anything else about that because that's obviously an Iron Flame findy outy thing. Anyway, she doesn't get to ask any more questions because her brother walks in, because he's not dead, and he was actually the mender that was kept hidden in Arisha. And that's what happened in Fourth Wing. So I hope this didn't end up being too long, and I hope it actually helps you remember some things that happened in Fourth Wing. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!